Welcome in. If you are prepping for a big presentation, trying to catch up on an entirely new subject, or you're just insanely curious about how the world actually works, we know the trap.
Oh yeah, the trap is definitely information overload.
It really is. You want that thorough knowledge, you want multiple perspectives, and you want those incredible aha moments.
Right.
But you definitely don't want to feel buried under a mountain of dry data. You want the shortcut to being well-informed without having to read a dense textbook.
Well, we are skipping the textbook today.
Completely.
It's a delicate balance, trying to synthesize decades or even centuries of information without losing the narrative thread.
Yeah.
The goal today is to provide that broader context for you. We're going to take raw data points and connect the dots so you can see not just what happened, but why it actually matters to you right now.
And the data points we're looking at today are surprisingly dramatic. We are taking a deep dive into the rich history of United States senators from Wisconsin.
A very interesting state to look at.
Truly.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple of really compelling sources for this. Primarily, we're looking at a comprehensive Wikipedia data set that meticulously tracks every single Senate seat in Wisconsin from its statehood in 1848 all the way up to the present day.
It's a massive timeline.
It is. And to frame all of that historical data, we are bringing in a striking statistic from a November 2024 report in the Washington Post.
Right, regarding the current political landscape of the entire country.
Exactly.
It's a remarkable collection of information because on the surface, a historical list of politicians might just look like, I don't know, a spreadsheet.
Just rows and columns.
Yeah, you see a long scrolling timeline of names, dates, and political parties. But when you look at the patterns within that timeline, a much larger story emerges about political experimentation.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are taking this timeline and uncovering the hidden narratives, the political whiplash, and the historic anomalies that are basically hiding in plain sight.
I love it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's go all the way back to the starting line. 1848.
The very beginning.
I'm looking at these dates, and the sheer speed of the logistics is blowing my mind. Wisconsin officially became a state on May 29, 1848.
A monumental day for the region, really establishing their formal entry into the Union.
But look at the timeline. Just 10 days later,
10 days.
on June 8, 1848, the state had already elected its very first 2 United States senators.
They did not waste any time.
Not at all. They sent 2 Democrats to Washington, Henry Dodge and Isaac P. Walker. I mean, 10 days to organize a state government and elect federal representatives in the mid-19th century.
It's almost hard to picture.
Think about the horses, the telegraphs, the raw logistics required to pull that off.
It highlights the extreme eagerness of a newly admitted state to establish its voice and its voting power on the federal level immediately. They did not want to waste a single legislative session.
Clearly.
But what's fascinating here is what happens next. If we look at the data, we see the very first major pattern emerge in the state's political identity. As you mentioned, the state started out with 2 Democratic senators in 1848. But it took less than a decade for a massive structural shift to occur.
Yeah, I'm scrolling down just to get on this data set right now, and the colors on the chart completely flip.
Precisely. By 1855, Republican Charles Durkee takes a seat. And then just 2 years later, in 1857, Republican James R. Doolittle takes the other seat.
So it's a total sweep.
A complete sweep. In less than 10 years from statehood, Wisconsin completely flipped its congressional representation, which kicked off an era of heavy, sustained Republican dominance in the state.
Wow.
And this early volatility is crucial for you to understand because it set a lasting precedent. From its very inception, the data shows us that Wisconsin was a state unafraid to dramatically change its mind.
It was never locked into a single political identity from the start.
Exactly.
A state unafraid to change its mind. That actually perfectly tees up an oddity I noticed as we move into the late 1800s.
Oh, the comebacks.
Yes. I was looking through the list of names, and I stumbled on something I didn't think happened in politics very often. I'm looking at Matthew H. Carpenter in the 1870s. It says he served a term as a Republican from 1869 to 1875, and the data set explicitly notes lost re-election.
A tough blow.
Usually that's the end of a politician's Wikipedia table, right? They just fade into history. But his name pops up again 4 years later. Is that a typo in the data set?
It's not a typo at all. It's a very unique historical quirk in this delegation. Carpenter actually runs again in 1879, wins, and takes the seat right back.
And John Coit Schooner does the exact same thing a few rows down.
He does.
He served from 1885 to 1891, lost his re-election bid, sat on the sidelines for several years, and then successfully returned to the Senate in 1897, serving another full decade.
It's pretty wild.
How do you just come back like that?
Well, it speaks to the deeply entrenched personal brands these figures must have built within the state. To leave office, maintain your political apparatus, and then successfully convince the state to send you back to Washington requires a formidable level of local influence.
Yeah.
It proves that in this state's politics, a defeat wasn't necessarily a permanent goodbye. Now, to fully appreciate how these overlapping terms and comebacks function, we should briefly clarify a structural element mentioned throughout the source material.
The Senate class system.
Yes, the Senate classes.
Please do explain that, because I see Class 1 and Class 3 over and over in this data, and honestly, it can be a bit confusing. What does that actually mean for you as a voter?
Think of the Senate like a board of directors where only a third of the members' contracts expire every 2 years.
Okay.
The founders didn't want the entire Senate to be replaced in a single election year and risk total chaos, so the seats are divided into 3 staggered classes, all with 6-year terms.
So it's an anti-panic mechanism.
Exactly that. The data specifically outlines Wisconsin's 2 current classes. Class 1 belongs to the electoral cycle that was recently contested in 2024, and its next election will be in 2030. And Class 3 belongs to the cycle contested in 2022, and its next election will be in 2028. If you're a voter, it just means you'll never have to replace both of your senators at the exact same time.
That makes total sense.
You are providing an ongoing, staggered assessment of your state's political direction rather than wiping the slate clean all at once.
Okay, understanding that structure makes this next part of the timeline really pop.
There you go.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We hit the early 20th century, and we meet Robert M. La Follette. Just looking at the raw dates, his tenure is unconventional from day one.
A towering figure in the state's history. And the data reflects his immense influence immediately.
So according to the timeline, La Follette is elected to the Senate in 1905. But he doesn't actually assume office until January 4th, 1906.
Right. There's a gap.
There's almost a full-year gap. The source notes explain he was currently the governor of Wisconsin, and he simply refused to go to Washington until he felt he had properly finished his business and officially resigned as governor.
He basically put a United States Senate seat on hold.
This made them wait.
Which is an incredible display of political leverage. Imagine the popularity required to tell Washington, D.C. to just wait for you while you finish your local agenda.
Unheard of.
And his delayed entry into the Senate marks the beginning of what we can accurately describe as a political dynasty within the data. La Follette served from 1906 all the way until his death in office on June 18, 1925.
And the dynasty aspect kicks in immediately. Just a few months after his death, a special election is held to finish his term, and the state elects his son.
Robert M. La Follette, Jr.
Exactly. The seat seamlessly transitions from father to son. But as I'm reading down the son's column, I see one of the most wild data anomalies in this entire document.
The visual shift on the timeline is striking.
It's completely jarring. La Follette Jr. starts off just like his father. He's listed as a Republican. He wins the special election in 1925 as a Republican, and he wins re-election in 1928 as a Republican. But then you hit his 1934 re-election data, and the party column literally changes color.
Out of nowhere.
A brand new third party appears out of nowhere in the official records. He is re-elected under the Progressive Party.
It's a fascinating evolution of political identity captured right there in the official tables. This wasn't a minor independent run that barely made a dent.
No, he won.
This was the formal establishment of a third-party apparatus strong enough to win a United States Senate seat, hold it, and eventually secure re-election in 1940 as well.
What does it take for a literal third party to just take over a Senate seat like that in the 1930s?
Well, it underscores that fiercely independent streak we've been tracking. The La Follette success proved that Wisconsin voters prioritize the person and their specific regional needs over the national party label.
The brand of the individual was stronger than the brand of the party.
Precisely. The state wasn't just willing to flip between Democrats and Republicans. It was willing to embrace an entirely different political vehicle if the candidate matched the moment.
You literally see the party label change before your eyes on the screen.
Right.
It's such a visceral reminder that these labels are fluid.
Very fluid.
But speaking of fluid labels and that independent instinct, that exact same voter behavior explains the most jarring political whiplash in the state's history just a few decades later.
The mid-century period is a masterclass in how fragile and unpredictable political eras can be.
Let's just look at the raw facts on the timeline here.
Yeah.
In the 1946 election, the data shows the state elected Republican Joseph McCarthy to the Senate.
Right?
He assumes office in 1947. He is successfully reelected by the state in 1952. But then, tragedy strikes during his second term. The timeline notes that Senator McCarthy died in office on May 2nd, 1957.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see how an unforeseen event, a sudden vacancy in the middle of a term, can completely rewrite the long-term history of a state.
Because they have to fill the seat.
Exactly. Because of the rules governing these vacancies, a special election had to be called to fill the remainder of that term.
And the contrast to what happens next is just massive. In August of 1957, just a few months after the sudden vacancy, Wisconsin holds that election, and they don't elect another Republican to finish out the term.
No, they don't.
They elect Democrat William Proxmire.
A fundamental pivot in representation.
Hold on, it's the scale of the pivot that blew my mind. Proxmire steps in to finish that term in 1957, and he just never leaves.
He stays for decades.
He goes on to be reelected again and again and again. According to the data, William Proxmire holds that seat all the way until January 3, 1989.
Unbelievable longevity.
He becomes the longest-serving senator in the history of Wisconsin. So you go from one of the most famous Republicans of the 20th century to a Democrat who holds the seat for 3 decades. Talk about giving your voters whiplash.
It's wild to think about how much timing dictates history here. This shows us that in the Senate, biological luck and timing can entirely rewrite a state's political legacy for half a century.
Literally overnight.
A single moment in 1957 locked in a political trajectory that lasted through the Cold War, the Civil Rights era, the Vietnam War, and all the way into the final days of the Reagan administration.
It really puts it in perspective.
It's a brilliant illustration of why understanding the mechanics of these vacancies and the voters' immediate reaction to them is so essential.
That transition perfectly brings us into the modern era. As we look at the late 20th and early 21st centuries on this list, you start to see some very long, stable runs.
You do.
After Proxmire's incredible tenure, the Democratic Party maintained a very strong grip on these seats. You see names like Gaylord Nelson serving from 1963 to 1981. You have Erd Cole with a massive run from 1989 to 2013. And Russ Feingold serving from 1993 to 2011. For a long stretch there, the timeline looks pretty steadily blue.
It does look that way. But history tells us that in this state, a dominant streak is often just the setup for the next balancing act.
Which brings us right up to the present day. If we look at the very top of the current delegation list, we see a fascinating reflection of everything we've talked about so far.
Your current roster.
Today, the state is represented by Republican Ron Johnson, who has held the Class 3 seat since 2011, and Democrat Tammy Baldwin, who has held the Class 1 seat since 2013.
A split delegation. 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. Currently representing the exact same group of voters.
And this is where we have to bring in that incredible context from the Washington Post report published in November of 2024.
The broader national view.
Yes. They analyzed the incoming 2025 United States Senate, and they found a staggering statistic. The report states that fewer states than ever will have split-party Senate delegations. In fact, as of 2025, Wisconsin is one of only 3 states in the entire country to have a split delegation.
Only 3?
Out of 50 states, only 3 have sent 1 senator from each party to Washington.
It's a vanishingly rare phenomenon in modern American politics. We're living in an era of intense national polarization, where states overwhelmingly tend to vote uniformly for one party or the other when it comes to federal representation.
Right.
The fact that Wisconsin remains in that tiny 3-state minority is highly significant.
So what does this all mean? When you, the listener, look at this data, what is the ultimate takeaway from all these shifting colors and sudden changes?
It means that this incredibly rare modern split perfectly mirrors the state's entire 175-year history. This isn't an accident, and it isn't a new phenomenon born out of recent political climates.
It's deep in their DNA.
Exactly. From those 10-day early flips in the 1850s to the fiercely independent progressive streak of the La Follettes in the 1930s, to the jarring McCarthy to Proxmire whiplash of the mid-century Wisconsin's data, proves it is a state that constantly, almost inherently, balances opposing political forces.
It actively resists being permanently categorized.
Yes. The current split delegation is simply the modern manifestation of a very old habit of political experimentation.
That's why diving into the raw data is so much better than just reading a headline. When you glance at the news today, you might think a split delegation is just a weird quirk of a recent election cycle. But when you look the whole timeline, you realize it's actually the state's defining characteristic.
It is the defining pattern.
Knowing this history gives you such a massive advantage in understanding modern political news. It proves that a list of names and dates isn't just trivia. It's literally a map of a state's evolving identity.
And exploring that map always leads to new layers of understanding. In fact, as we wrap up our analysis of this historical timeline, this raises an important question,
Okay, what is it?
one that goes beyond the names and dates. If we look at the very bottom of the source material, in the broader profile of the state, we see a list of Wisconsin's highly distinct geographic and cultural regions.
Oh, the geographic breakdown of the state itself.
Exactly. You see these distinct areas listed. You have the WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington surrounding Milwaukee with their specific suburban dynamics.
Right.
You have the rugged, unglaciated terrain of the driftless area in the west. There's the maritime culture and tourism-heavy economy of the Door Peninsula.
Very different vibes.
And then you have the dense industrial corridors of the Fox River Valley. It's a state of immense geographic and cultural variety packed into a single border.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So I would challenge you to consider this as you continue your own learning. How much of this constant historical push and pull in the Senate is actually being driven by these wildly varying local cultures within Wisconsin's own borders?
Wow.
Is the political whiplash we see in Washington merely a reflection of the deep geographic diversity back home?
I love that. Leaving you with a totally new angle to explore. The history of the state isn't just happening in the voting booth. It's tied to the land, the regions, and the very different ways people live across that map.
It's all connected.
That is a brilliant final thought to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We know your time is valuable, and we love that you choose to spend it feeding that curiosity with us. Keep questioning the data, keep looking for those hidden narratives, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.